Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I am back with another reading recap. It's been about 3 weeks since I last talked to you about what I have been reading, and there are a lot of books that I want to talk about today, so let's go ahead and get into them. The first book that I want to talk about is actually one I just finished yesterday, and that is This Strange Eventful History by Claire Messud. Now, this is a book that's been on my radar for a while. It's been getting a lot of buzz. It's actually even slipped into some people's Booker Prize long list predictions. So I had pretty high hopes and high expectations for this book, but sadly, it did not hit the mark for me. I know it's going to be an unpopular opinion, and I'm sorry if you liked this book, but I found it to be dull, I found it to be boring, and it was actually a bit of a slog for me to get through. In fact, the most exciting part of this entire book literally happened in the epilogue with just a couple pages left to go in the book. There was a reveal that literally dropped my jaw and almost made my lunch come up because it was kind of gross, but that was the most exciting part of this entire book for me. Now, this is a semi-autobiographical book, and it is a sprawling one in the sense that it covers a long period of time and several generations. So it goes from the 1940s the whole way through up to the 2010s. It follows a family called, I think it's the Khazars or the Cesars. I'm probably not getting that pronunciation right, so I apologize. But normally I really like those epic family dramas where we have a lot of characters and we have a lot of time passing, but I really struggled to get into this one, and I think that one of the things I found most disappointing was that I personally didn't feel like there was interesting things that were actually happening to this family in the grand scheme of things. Now, of course, there were things that were happening. There were events that were happening during those times that definitely impacted their lives. But I kept thinking about how, if we're talking about, say, the 40s, World War II was in full swing, and there were a lot of things that families were going through at that time. And yes, their things that they were going through were very difficult and challenging for them, but the same could have been said for any family that was living during that time. And I have read so many World War II stories. I have read so many family sagas that have covered long periods of time, and I don't feel like this book delivered anything new or unique that hasn't already been said before or done before. I will say the most kind of intriguing part or fascinating part of this story for me was how worldly this family was. One thing that you can't take away from the family is the fact that they were all over the world, and this book will take you to many different places. It'll take you from Algeria to Massachusetts to Toronto to Argentina to Australia to France. You are seeing this family go all over the place. So I found that to be a very interesting aspect of the family. But aside from that, all of the other stories were just what seemed to me very common and normal stories that most families have some version of their own that is very similar. So unfortunately, this was a miss for me. And I rarely say this about books, but this is one of those books that I think could have maybe even benefited from being longer. I know that Messud is a talented writer. I did really enjoy her writing style. I will say I struggled a little bit with the structure of this book as well. One of the things that was difficult for me to follow along with was, because we cover a long period of time, it's not a story that takes you cohesively from 1940 into 2010. It does time jumps. So you would have, say, 2 chapters in 1948, and then you would jump ahead to 2 chapters in the 1950s, and then you jump ahead again to 2 more chapters set in the 60s. And when we would get to the new date, you didn't have a lot of knowledge of what had happened in the in-between, and Messud didn't always give you that information. As a reader, I felt like I was trying to piece things together, and there were just a lot of gaps for me. For example, we had a chapter where one of the family members, his name was Francois, was in college. He was at Amherst in Massachusetts, and then we jump forward to a chapter that's narrated by a different person in the 50s, and then, or I'm sorry, in the 60s, I believe. And then we find out that it's from the perspective of Francois's wife, Barbara. But Barbara had never been mentioned before. We didn't know her. I had no idea who she was. And now we're learning about Barbara and Barbara's family. And then it's like, well, how did we get from A to B here? And eventually, like, we did get bits and pieces to fill in the gap, but I never really felt like we got the whole story. And because of that, I don't feel like we ever really spent enough time with the characters for me to bond with them or to me to connect with them. So it just basically made for a pretty flat reading experience for me. I am definitely sad to say. The next book that I finished is another one that I have seen popping up on some people's Booker Prize long list predictions, and that is You Are Here by David Nicholls. This is actually my first David Nicholls. I've never read any of his works, but I have watched some of the screen adaptations for some of the books that he has written. So I do enjoy the types of stories that he tells, and I found this book to be a very pleasant read. This book is basically about 2 lonely people that have had past failed marriages, and they both find different ways to cope with that. We have Michael that has kind of found solace in nature, and he takes these long meandering walks all the time to kind of avoid what's going on in his life. And then we have Marnie, who kind of takes the opposite approach, where she is more content holding herself up in her flat and wants to just spend her days reading books and avoiding the outside world. And they end up having this mutual friend that organizes this walking trip across the English countryside, and both of them agree to go. And this is just as we follow them on that adventure, and they're learning about themselves, and then they're learning about each other. And I really did enjoy this book. I don't think that it's necessarily doing anything extraordinary or unique in its telling, but I did find that I connected to the characters. I found them to be lovable and believable, and it was just one of those kind of pure, wholesome, cozy reads. And I don't think that it's going to make any Booker Prize list. Like, I don't think that the book is that exceptional that it would be able to achieve something like that, but it was definitely a solid read, and I would love to see an adaptation of this as well. I know that he often gets a lot of his works adapted, and I think that this would make a really fun one as well. Now, the next book that I want to talk about is one called Piglet by Lottie Hazel. Now, the book follows our main character. She goes by the name of Piglet. It was a childhood nickname that kind of stuck with her, and she is a cookbook editor, and we meet her a few weeks before her wedding to this man named Kit. A couple weeks before the wedding takes place, Kit decides that he is going to confess this major betrayal to Piglet, and although Piglet agrees to move forward with the wedding, she starts to, because of all of the stress and the pressure, she starts to kind of spiral out of control, and she develops this ravenous hunger and behavior that she can't control, and she can never be satisfied. And that's basically, you know, the rest of the book is following her through her spiral leading up to the event of the wedding. And this was a really interesting read. I did enjoy this book very much. It's a book that has a lot of really gorgeous food writing, and she's always cooking these really elaborate dishes, so it's gonna make you hungry while you're reading it. So I recommend a snack before you pick it up. Now, there was one particular thing about this book that I really didn't like, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say this, but we never find out what Kit did. We never learn about the betrayal and the action that was behind it. And I know that some people are gonna say, what does it matter? We don't need to know. All we need to know is that Piglet felt that this was the ultimate betrayal. And I get that. But as a reader, I want to have some perspective. I invested my time in the book, and it just left me wanting to know more. And I know that that's probably exactly what the author wanted. She wanted us to feel just as hungry as Piglet did. She wanted us to feel just unsatisfied as Piglet did. But oh, I wanted to know, and I felt cheated. When somebody throws out unforgivable betrayal, I want to know what that betrayal is. And because I know they can be subjective, somebody's idea of an ultimate betrayal could be something that you personally could have forgiven somebody for. I think of cheating as an example. Cheating with a stranger could potentially be a forgivable betrayal for somebody, but sleeping with someone's grandma, that might be a deal breaker. Like, that is what I wanted to know. Like, what was this betrayal that could not be forgiven? And I'm still thinking about it. It's still eating away at me. But kudos to the writer, because she definitely did what she probably aimed out to do, which was get me to feel those same type of feelings that Piglet was going through. But aside from that, it was a good book, and I really did enjoy it. The next book I want to talk about is called The Road to Dalton by Shannon Bowring. And this is a book that is going to be for any fans of Olive Kitteridge. This book has major Olive Kitteridge vibes for a couple reasons. First of all, it's also set in small town Maine. And second of all, it's structured as a novel, but it is definitely more of a closely interconnected short story type of book as well. Very much like Olive Kitteridge in that sense. However, with Olive Kitteridge, she is the main character and she presents herself in each of the stories. I think what really makes this unique is that there's really not one character or set of characters that I feel are the main characters of the book. I think each character is really well developed and distinct, so I really appreciated this book for that. This was a very ambitious book, and it tackles a lot of different themes. So it's one of those books where there's literally something for everyone. So we're tackling things like marriage and extramarital affairs. We have secret lesbian romances. We even have some teenage characters where we're getting a coming of age type story. We have pregnancy and postpartum, and we have death and addiction and spousal abuse, and there's just a lot of things going on. Anything that you can think of as far as that sleepy little town where everybody has their own things going on, everybody has their own lives and secrets, and it was just so entertaining. It was beautifully written. It was done so well. And this book is also set in the 90s as well, the very early 90s, so there's a lot of nostalgia there as well. And it also takes us back to a time where a lot of the topics that are being discussed, such as gay relationships, were not necessarily as well accepted as they are today. So the book also tackles the prejudices that went along with relationships that were happening back in the early 90s. So I think this book was so well done. However, I'm not surprised because it's a Europa Editions book, and if you followed my channel for any period of time, you know that Europa is one of my favorite publishers and they never let me down. My only criticism that I had for this book, and it doesn't even matter actually, but when I finished it, I felt like it abruptly ended and there were too many loose ends. I had too many questions. I didn't want to leave the people of Dalton yet. I wasn't ready. Like, I felt like I was being gypped and I needed more story. And then I found out or realized that this is a part of a series and the next book is coming out in September, on September 3rd, I believe. So if this book at all sounds interesting to you, please pick it up and get it read before that next one comes out so that you can go ahead and go straight into that. The next one is called Where the Forest Meets the River, and like I said, it comes out on September 3rd, so something to look forward to as well. The next book is The Book of Mother by Violaine Huisman, and it was translated from the French by Leslie Camhi, and this one was actually longlisted for the International Booker back in 2022. This is a piece of autofiction. It was a coming-of-age story that centers not around the person growing up per se, but of their mother actually, that goes by the name of Maman and the impact that her mother had on her. Now, Maman is this larger-than-life, eccentric character, and she is totally untamable. She is like a whirling dervish, and she severely struggles with her mental health and maintaining healthy relationships with not only her children, but her husband, her family, all the romantic interests that she has in her life. And this was a really good read, although it's one of those books that made me uncomfortable. I get very anxious with characters like this, and although I find them extremely enigmatic and fascinating, I feel on the edge the whole time, especially when there are children involved with the story. Stories like this just always have me on edge, but I will say though that this book felt very different than a lot of other books like that. So often when we read books like that, it's trying to paint that person that is that way in a negative light. And this one, I didn't really get that vibe. I felt like this was more about the love that the author had for her mother, and I felt that that was very evident, and this was more of a tribute to her mother than actually bashing her mother for the way that she was and the person that she was. So although it was tense and it did give me all those feelings of anxiousness because you feel like you're watching this train wreck happen right in front of you, I will say that I did feel a little better about it because you could really tell that the author had very fond feelings toward her mother and not necessarily bad ones. So I would definitely say that this was a good reading experience. The next book that I want to talk about is a book called Prima Facie, and this is by Suzie Miller. Now, this was another really difficult read, but I'm glad I read it and I think it was an important one. So this novel is actually one that was adapted by a one-woman play that Suzie Miller wrote by the same name, and it follows Tessa, and Tessa is a criminal defense barrister, and she is often the one that is put in charge of defending men that have been accused of sexual assault. Now, when Tessa is sexually assaulted by one of her barrister co-workers, she is now on the other side of that fence and having to prove her case as a victim while she is battling all the defense tactics that she is often the one delivering while she is defending those that have been accused. And this book isn't for the faint of heart. It's one that is going to make you angry. It's going to make you sad. It's going to make you think, and having that side from both perspectives of her being the one defending men that are the abusers and the tactics that she uses to get for them to get away with what they have done, and then being on the other side of that coin, being that victim that has had that horrible thing happen to her, when she has colleagues on the other side trying to discredit her and helping that man get away with the horrific things that he did to her. It was so powerful, it was so emotional, and this book is a tough read. And if you at all have issues or trigger warnings associated with sexual assault, this is going to be one that you're going to want to avoid. But it definitely was an eye-opener, and having those perspectives from both sides I think is just so important, and it brings up all of those questions of ethics and ideas, and exposed a lot of those horrors about the victims of assault, how they continue to be victimized by our justice systems. And it certainly wasn't an easy read, but it was a very effective one, and I am really glad that I read it. Now, the next book I want to talk about is Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. And this is the latest book from Sarah Perry, and I was such a fan of The Essex Serpent that I was super excited to read this one. Now, this is kind of a difficult book to describe, so I probably won't do it justice, but I will try. So we have Thomas and we have Grace, and Thomas is at the beginning of the book, which I think takes place in 1997. He's a middle-aged man. He's been single all his life. He lives alone, and he's a newspaper columnist at the local newspaper. And then we have Grace, and Grace is the daughter of the preacher at the local Baptist church that Thomas also goes to. And Grace is 17 at the time, but she's lived kind of a tough life. She lost her mother at a very young age, and over the years, her and Thomas have bonded, and they have become unlikely friends, even though there's about a 30-year age gap between the two of them. Then, as the story progresses, both of them find themselves falling in love with these other people, and ultimately, these relationships that they are pursuing ends up putting a wedge between Thomas and Grace, and it forces them apart. Now, during the backdrop of all of this, we have Thomas becoming obsessed with kind of this local legend about this mystery manor that is supposedly haunted by this ghost of this 19th century astronomer. And throughout the book, we are kind of set around events related to comets. So we have this mystery, we have these relationships that are trying to get off the ground, but do they or don't they? And this is ultimately a book that, although the plot is kind of difficult to explain, the human emotions that go along with it are very palpable. Now, I know I am probably not selling the plot. I would not buy what I was putting down as far as what I just said about the plot, but I don't want to give too much of the details away, because it really would, I feel like, take away from the overall experience of the book. I feel like this book is one of those that is less about the plot and more about the feelings that you get and the characters whose lives you are watching unfold in front of you. So we have the themes of friendship. We have the friendship between Thomas and Grace, and then we have the love that they are trying to find in these two other people. Sometimes that love is received, and sometimes love love can be unrequited. And I think that Sarah Perry did such an amazing job. And not only is she delivering this story with all of this emotion, but it does have that air of mystery about it. And if any of you have read Sarah Perry before, you know that there's something magical and entrancing about the way that she writes. There's a bleakness about it that's gonna break your heart, but it also has that thread of hope running through it, through its entirety, to give you faith in the world again. And I think that there are so few books out there that really focus on unrequited love, and I love books about unrequited love. I think that it's an underappreciated type of love story out there. So often books focus on the good parts of love, but love can be ugly and it can be painful too. And I think that this was a really beautiful example of that. And one of the weird things that Sarah Perry is always able to do with her writing, and it always makes me scratch my head as to how she gets away with this, but the book is set in the 1990s and then it goes through to pretty close to current day. But the way that she writes it, it feels old-timey to me. It feels Victorian, it feels Edwardian in the language and just the simplicity of it, and I don't know how she's able to pull that off, but she did. And I understand that this book is not going to be for everyone, but I do feel like if you were at all a fan of the Essex Serpent, all of those elements are there, and I think that you would definitely like this one as well. And the last book that I want to talk about that I finished over the last few weeks is one called Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books by Kirsten Miller. And this was a really nice escape from all those heavy literary titles that I have been reading. Now, first things first, I can confidently say that if you are at all in support of any type of book banning, this book is not going to be for you. This book follows a wide array of characters in a small Georgian town, and it focuses on a free little library that's hosted by a woman that's named Lula Dean. So Lula's your typical closed-minded, God-fearing bigot, and she thinks the only books that children should ever be exposed to are the Bible or ones that talk about how great the antebellum South was. So she creates this little free library in her yard, and she puts in all of the books that she deems appropriate for the town folks to read. And then we have a prankster, and this prankster comes and swaps out all of the dust jackets in Lula Dean's little library and put them on the books that she banned or tried to get banned from the local library. So unbeknownst to Lula, her little library is actually distributing all of the things that she considers filth. And of course, the drama will ensue, and we quickly see that the books are the least of the town's problems when all of their dirty, awful secrets start to come out. So this was a book that tackled an obviously serious issue, but it did it with a lot of wit and charm. And although it was a little predictable and convenient, and everything fell into place and was perfect, and the town was able to change people's minds, it did deliver on what it promised, and it was a very entertaining read, and I appreciated it for that. So the books that I'm currently reading, I'm really trying to stay away from starting a whole lot of books at the moment because the Booker Prize long list is going to be announced in just a few days. So right now I'm really using this time to focus on my year-long project book, which is Les Mis, and I am also just starting Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is just a lighthearted, quick summer read that I will hopefully have done before then. So yeah, lots of reading to come with the Booker long list. I'm really looking forward to it. And that's it for my recap, and until we read again, bye!